So tariffs create unnecessary economic disruption and drive inflation. They are hurtful to all sides. That from the European Union, as a spokesman said the EU will respond firmly to the US or any trading partner that unfairly or arbitrarily imposes tariffs on EU goods. It comes as EU leaders are meeting today in Brussels to discuss the latest after Trump himself said he absolutely plans to target the EU in the future after he first slapped levies this weekend on Canada, Mexico and China. Well, we're going to cross live then to Brussels to where that meeting is taking place. Talk to our correspondent Dave Keating, who joins us from there. Dave, it feels like, although he's not there, Trump is dominating this gathering.
For sure. I mean, this gathering was called to talk about defense, and of course, the subject of Greenland is going to be looming over the summit very heavily. But now, because of the actions against Canada and Mexico over the weekend and Trump's promise that the EU is next in terms of his trade wars, the subject of trade will also be dominating today's summit. Now, we've noticed a distinct change in tone from the EU yesterday. Up until this weekend, the European Commission here behind me has not wanted to really talk about this. And every time they were asked about the prospect of Trump's tariffs, they would say they would have platitudes about how great the EU-US relationship is, that they don't think this would happen because it would be so damaging to the global economy. Well, guess what? It's happening. And so now they have to shift into a different mode here. There was a change in language. You noted that the spokesperson yesterday said that there would be a firm response. That's really an upgrade from the last language we had about this from the European Commission when you had the economy chief, Valdis Dombrovskis, say any such response, which is so unlikely because this is all very unlikely, would be, quote, proportionate. So clearly this is a break glass moment for that Plan B emergency retaliation plan that the Commission has said all along that they have, but they haven't been willing to talk about what's in it. And so I imagine behind these closed doors today with the European prime ministers and presidents, they will be fleshing out a little bit more what those plans are. We'll see if that is leaked. They certainly don't want it to be leaked because they do not want to escalate this situation. And of course, the nightmare scenario for them would be that if it gets out exactly what they're planning to retaliate with, that's going to instigate Trump into very quickly putting on maximum tariffs against the EU when that might have been avoided otherwise. Now, what might they do? We have a little bit of an indication based on the tariffs that Trump put in during his first term. Now, these tariffs during the first term were much, much less compared to what he's talking about now. That was just 25% on imports of steel and 10% on imports of aluminum. Now we're talking about a blanket tariff on all products. It is a totally different ballgame. However, back then, the EU responded with tariffs on items of Americana, motorcycles, whiskey, blue jeans, things particularly that were made in the heartland of the Republican Party. So that may be what we can expect for a first round. But I think, and all expectations here now, is this is going to be much, much more serious than what we saw during the first term, that this could very quickly escalate into a full-blown trade war. And the IMF has warned, because the EU-US trade makes up such a huge part of the global economy, this could wipe out 7% of GDP for the entire planet Earth. So it's a very serious situation here. Nobody here in Brussels wants to escalate this, but the time for wishful thinking that maybe Trump won't actually follow through on this is clearly over.
Dave, as you said at the top there, this meeting initially called anyways to talk about defence and spending on defence alongside NATO.
Yes, exactly. And that's going to be what they come out of the summit with. There won't be any official conclusions at the end of the summit because this was an informal summit called by Antonio Costa, the new European Council chief. What he specifically wants to talk about is EU funding for defense. And the big disagreement is where they should buy that military equipment. French President Emmanuel Macron is insisting that there should be a buy European clause on this new EU military spending. He does not want to see this money flowing to the United States because if the point of Europe spending more on its defense is to make itself more sovereign and less dependent, if they're buying all of that military equipment from the United States, that doesn't make them any less dependent on the United States. So France's point here is that if the EU is going to do this, and they should and they need to buy European so they lessen that dependency. But that is running into huge resistance, particularly from the very pro-American Eastern Eastern European EU member states. Germany is not so keen on this, particularly because they want to be able to use the Patriot missiles that the U.S. Defense Industrial Complex makes, because that's going to be part of this new plan for an EU shield, missile shield over the European Union. So the key thing to watch here is whether President Macron comes in here with a compromise offer, let's say, with a less sweeping by European plan that he could sign off on, where, for instance, those Patriot missiles could be allowed. We'll see. But what I'm hearing from the French side is they have no intention to back down on this, and it would be a long-term strategic mistake for European countries and the EU particularly, what we're talking about here, money from the EU budget, to be used to deepen Europe's dependence on the United States, particularly given that the President of the United States is threatening a military invasion of the territory of an EU member state at the moment.